Almost. Once this gets to full, you can go.
All right, get those cheeks situated on that chair.
Actually, it's a bed.
No wonder why you're moving around so much.
Yeah, no, I needed to get a place with a neutral background and
Yeah.
quiet and
Maybe your head up just a little because we can't see your chinny chin chin. Oh yeah, now we got you.
Okay.
Maybe even just a skosh more, just a tiny bit, so we could see that underarm. There you go.
yeah, those are our new sponsors this year.
I love it. All right. Good morning, everyone, and those on the East Coast, good afternoon. Welcome to day 3 of National Blind Sports Week. And on day 3, the middle of our National Sports Week, we are featuring Judo today. And I am so honored and privileged to introduce to you our guest speaker today, Dr. Mark Vink. Mark Vink started in Judo in 1962. And actually, it wasn't Judo he started in, it was self-defense. As a young youth, he wanted to learn how to defend himself. But what he did is he discovered Judo in 62, and he thought Judo would be more fun than just doing self-defense classes. This taking place back in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And from there, the rest is history as Coach Vink and Mark Vink has gone on in a stellar career as a judo or a judoka athlete, and then as a coach. Later on, then in his years, being the team leader for Team USA, attending 3 Paralympic Games, serving our judo team during the 2000 Paralympic Games, the 2004 London Paralympic Games, and the Rio Paralympic Games. Dr. Vink recently wrote a book on teaching fundamentals of judo, and I'm sure he'll share some of that book this morning. And here to speak about the gentle way, judo being the sport of the gentle way, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Vink.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this. Judo, you have an interest in judo. I had an interest in judo as a young man. I saw judo as an opportunity to develop myself physically and to provide me an opportunity to defend myself. As a young man, I was weak, underdeveloped, and judo gave me an opportunity to equal the playing field, so to speak. I thought it was fascinating. With the flick of a hand, you could throw somebody 2 or 3 feet away from you. It was almost like magic. So that's what attracted me to the sport. Be able to develop those kind of skills. But I soon found out that self-defense was sort of boring. It's a lot of repetitive work, and it's a lot of pretend punching and kicking. Where judo is the real thing. You're actually engaging someone in real life situations in the club, and so because of the reality associated with it, there's a more practical way to really learn self-defense and also a sport at the same time. I was lucky that judo was introduced into the Olympic Games in 1964. So because it became an Olympic sport, its popularity surged all over the world. For those of you that don't know this, judo is the second most popular sport in the world in terms of total participation. You wouldn't know that in the United States because most folks don't even know what judo is. But overseas, especially in Europe and Asia, even some South America, judo is enormously popular. If you look at any Olympic Games or Paralympic Games, a way to test that is to see how many of the athletes carrying their national flags as they walk into the arena are judo athletes. And to my surprise, game in and game over and over again, about between 50 and 60% of the athletes carrying their national flag into the arena are judo athletes. So that's a great honor, and it says a lot about the sport. The sport continues to grow. When I started Paralympic Judo almost 16 years ago, It was popular, but nothing like today. Today, you've got commercial sponsors for athletes. They provide money, training, clothing for athletes. A lot of that didn't exist 16 years ago. It's definitely growing. I'm going to take a look at my notes here real quick, and we'll get into some of the details. So Judo is a martial art. It was developed in Japan over a course of hundreds of years. In Japan, because it was so cut up into different areas, you had these different warlords had standing armies, and these folks started to practice ways to advance warfare. Jiu-jitsu, which is the precursor to judo, was one of those arts. So these soldiers would practice swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, all types of manner of warfare skills. But when it came to hand-to-hand combat, you've lost your sword, you've lost your horse, and it's just you against the other guy. Then they developed the jiu-jitsu techniques of kicking, punching, strangling, holding the person down, controlling them, arm bars, and things like that. That was highly developed in Japan over the course of several hundred years. Around the late 1860s, Japan opened up to the rest of the world, and it realized that it was way behind technologically. So all the things that were traditional in Japanese culture started to disappear and were replaced by Western ideas. There's a young man, his name is Jigoro Kano. He saw what was happening and he wanted to save jiu-jitsu for a future generation. And he realized also that it was a great way to keep in shape and have some fun. So he took jiu-jitsu, he took the best elements of jiu-jitsu and formulated his own art, which he called Judo. As Mark referred to before, Judo is known as the gentle way. Gentle meaning that you can control someone gently by using their own force against them, as opposed to force against force. That's the magic of Judo. Once you understand the techniques of Judo, it doesn't require a lot of strength to do. It requires skill and knowledge of how to execute the technique. Anyway, so Judo was at this point being developed in the 1880s and became an Olympic sport in 1964. We have an organization called the International Judo Federation, which controls all of the judo rules. And then we have an organization parallel to that, which is called IPSA, the International Blind Sports Federation. And those are the folks that I work with to go to international competitions, to go to the Pan American Games, and eventually also go to the Olympic Games, or which are referred to as the Paralympic Games. Today, Japan is not the leader in judo. Most of the advanced judo takes place in Europe, where it's very popular, practiced almost in every city. Even in France, which has about 500,000 competitors in judo, that's a larger competitive size than they have in Japan. It is truly an international sport, and when you go to these meets, you will see hundreds and hundreds of athletes competing for their nations. What is the objective? The objective of judo is to score, which we refer to as ippon. Ippon is like a knockout punch in boxing. Now, you can score an ippon by throwing someone flat on their back, or you can throw them on their side, so you get a half a point, and then you'd have to follow up with another half a point. You can also score by submitting somebody with an arm bar or a choke, so they give up or tap out, or you can hold them down for a minimum of 20 seconds. All of those things are used in combination with one another to win a match. A match is 4 minutes long. Now, the major distinction between judo and Paralympic judo is that for Paralympic judo, you start a match holding on to one another. So for those of you that have wrestled before, it's very similar to that. It's a touch start, And after the referee says begin, then you're free to do the moves that you have. So a match theoretically could last only 2 or 3 seconds, depending on how fast you score any pawn. So again, you could throw someone on their back with various types of judo throws, foot throws, hip throws, arm throws, shoulder throws, and sacrifice throws. Or you can hold them down in a hold for a minimum of 20 seconds. Or you can get them in an arm bar on the mat and have them tap out twice, submit. Or they can be strangled and also tap out and submit. So those are the ways to win. I should say that some of this probably sounds like, oh my gosh, this is a rough sport. But also, ultimately, the most important thing in our sport is safety. So safety is built into every aspect of what we do. And really, there are very few injuries in judo compared to other combat sports and other contact sports. And there's the other way to win, of course, is a violation of the rules. Judo's got a code of honor that's associated with it, where ethics are very important in judo. You have skill, you have been given this gift to defend yourself well and execute techniques, but the ethics behind all that are very important. You have to respect your opponent and never try to use these skills in a dark sort of way. So they really do teach you to modify your behavior and to stay as calm as possible. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so this sport is open to visually impaired people, both male and female, of all ages. It is also open to the deaf and visually impaired. So we do have athletes that have a wide range of visual impairment, and they have athletes that are deaf with a wide range of visual impairments. If you look at the slide, the top slide, you'll see one of our former athletes, Jordan Mouton. She's wearing the judo gi, which is the outfit that you wear. And what that does is it allows you to grab each other and creates enormous torque for throwing. You can see on her left shoulder that she's wearing a red patch. It's a 6 centimeter patch that designates her as a B1 athlete. And we'll talk about B1s, B2s, and B3s in a little while. But that's one way to determine if an athlete is totally blind or not. The slide underneath that is a Hungarian athlete that's wearing an orange patch, and that designates that she has a hearing deficiency or is hard of hearing or may, in fact, be totally deaf. And then the last slide underneath that, I think, is a Russian athlete, and she is both totally blind and profoundly deaf. So that these are the combinations of disabilities that come together. All of this has to be certified through an optometrist or ophthalmologist. And once that's done and you have written evidence that you are in fact visually impaired, then you can move to the next step. The next step is, let's take a look at the next slide. These are the 3 designations we have in Paralympic Judo. These 3 designations currently all fight together. So you could have a B1 fighting a B3, a B2 fighting a B1. So let's look real carefully at those definitions. Okay, a B1 is an athlete that has a total absence of light perception in both eyes, or some perception of light, but the inability to recognize a hand from any distance. So this is a person that would have, and about 28% of all judo athletes are B1s. So now you have the B2 category. That is the ability to recognize the shape of a hand to the visual acuity of 2/60, and or have a field of range of less than 5 degrees. So a lot of times what happens with B2s is they have been B3s for many years, or are now losing their vision and transitioning into the B1 stage. And about 36% of all of our athletes, judoka athletes in the world, fall into that category. And then finally, you have the B3 category, which is a visual acuity of less than 2/60 through 6/60, and or a visual field less than 5 degrees and or less than 20 degrees. Okay, and about 36% of all of our competing judoka fall into that category. Mind you, these categories all fight together now. There is no wearing of a mask or any sort. These folks go out and they will have a touch to start the match. The referee will say begin, and then the match starts, and the first person to score a pawn wins the match. Now that does present some difficulties in terms of coaching an athlete, especially an athlete that's deaf. You have to develop strategy before you go onto the mat and have your match, because the coach can't really help you much during the match if you can't hear them. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, I already told you a match is 4 minutes. Matches start by facing one another in a neutral stance and a neutral grip. The neutral grip is usually your right hand is on the person's collar and the left hand is underneath their sleeve. And that's how you start. You drop your hands, you grab, and you always grab in that position. That position has shown to be the safest position for our sport, with the least amount of injuries coming out of that. The scoring by the referee uses both hand signals so that the audience can see, and those B2 and B3 athletes can see, but it also uses voice commands so that B1 athletes are also in the know in terms of where they are in terms of a match, who's ahead. So whenever there's a full point or a half a point, the referee will touch the B1 athlete on the palm and scribble on there an I for a pawn, a W for a wazari, which is a half a point. And then the buzzer also sounds at 1 minute to let both athletes know that you have a minute left in the competition. For those that are deaf, the referee will give them a tap on their right shoulder, letting the athlete know that there is 1 minute left in the competition. Let's take a look at the next slide. So we have various weight categories. We have 7 weight categories for men, starting at the lowest or the lightest category of 60 kilos. Then moving to 66, 73, 81, 90, 100, and plus 100 kilos. So you have B1s, B2s, and B3s in each of those categories competing. And then for women, you have starting at minus 48 kilos to 52, 57, 63, minus 70, and then plus 70 kilos. A typical international competition, a World Cup, a World Games, a Paralympic Games, will bring anywhere between 300 and 500 athletes to a competition, with an additional audience, especially at Olympic Games, of between, say, 10 to 12,000 people watching a match. So it's very exciting, very loud. It's just a terrific feeling to go out there. Let's look at our last slide there. And you'll see that the top slide is one of our more successful athletes, Miles Porter, who took a silver medal in Beijing. I'm sorry, in London. And then underneath that, we have another one, American athletes receiving his bronze medal in Rio de Janeiro. Our athletes have done well. We are not the best country in judo, but we're certainly far from being the worst. But there are a lot of other countries coming into the fold. India, for example, now a highly populated country, is now starting judo, or they have about 2 or 3 years ago, and they're funding huge teams. China, which is another large country with a lot of blind folks, have large teams. These countries will take anywhere between 20 and 30 athletes to a competition. Let's see what else I can tell you about the uniform. The uniforms are fairly inexpensive. They cost about $40, $50. You notice the different color belts. The black belt is the belt that tells you that they've been around for a while. Usually you start with a white belt, which is a beginner level. You move up to a yellow belt, then an orange belt, green, blue, brown, and then eventually black. It takes about 4 years to get a black belt. Athletes that are lucky, that have good coaches, can do it in a shorter period of time, especially those athletes that have a wrestling background. We've been very lucky in the United States to have come across really good wrestlers who have converted from wrestling to judo. One of the reasons they wanted to do that is they wrestled in high school and then went on to college and realized that college wrestling was a lot more difficult. And even after college wrestling, nothing existed. I mean, you could join a wrestling club, but wrestling was just not a life sport, and judo is. When I started judo as a kid at 12 years old, competing, and now I'm 73 and I'm still doing judo. So I've done judo my entire life and enjoyed it immensely. So I've got off track there a little bit, but anyway, those are the different belt colors, the ages that are involved. And what it does, though, it creates a very high level of fitness for the person practicing judo. You can easily go through 4,000 calories, 5,000 calories in a workout, and that's burning a lot of calories. So you can get fit very quickly in judo, as well as getting your self-defense and getting your sport aspects in. There really is no difference between judo and Paralympic judo other than the rules. And the basic difference in the rules are you start the match with contact with one another. As soon as you lose contact, the referee will stop the match and you start from contact again. Safety is hugely important, and we have very few injuries as you're learning a combat sport. I'll take some questions at this point.
Fantastic presentation, Dr. Vink. Thank you so much. I have a question for you. And my question is, so for any parent out there that has a child who's blind or visually impaired, or an athlete calls you and they want to start to get involved in judo, what do you recommend?
Okay, there are actually two ways to go about doing this. USABA has the website, and they've listed on their website a few videos of judo to get you familiar with that. And they also have contact points. USA Judo has a website, usajudo.org, and they have a list of clubs by state and contact points. You could always contact me directly or any of the other coaches, and we would put you in contact directly with a coach or ourselves, if at all possible. So that it's very easy to find a club. What we have is a certification program, so that if you were to be interested in going to a club and that person was not familiar with teaching the blind or visually impaired, we have a coach certification program that teaches coaches how to work with the blind and visually impaired at various levels, so that you get the most out of your practice sessions.
Fantastic, thanks. My friend and colleague, Walt Ranieri out of California asks the following question. What are the most common injuries in judo, and what ages do you see most of the injuries occurring?
Okay, so the injuries start occurring when the athlete gets really serious about training, and the matches become more severe. That doesn't happen until after years and years of practice. But judo is grown and developed so quickly over the last, say, 20 years, that the level of expertise and skill level is just phenomenal, and the athleticism and the fitness levels are just over the top. So when an athlete starts to train for world level competition at a very hard level, or very, intense level, then that's when you start to see more injuries. The types of injuries that are most common in Paralympic judo are head injuries, head-to-head contact or collisions. And that comes really from poor mat management, where you have too many athletes on the mat moving around quickly at one time. If you have and we teach our coaches this, if you have a B1 athlete, you have to, for the entire length of that session, have that athlete in your visual plane. You can never turn your back on a B1 athlete. And you do that to protect that athlete, because the space is so important to them. And with the movement, they can travel across a large space quickly. And with other athletes doing the same thing, you can have collision. So you can minimize collision very easily by just limiting the number of people that are traveling on the mat at one time. So that's one way to do that. The second most common injury would be a shoulder injury, where a person is rushed through the art of falling. In judo, we throw one another, and although from the outside it looks terrible to fall like that, it must be very painful. In fact, it isn't if you know how to fall correctly. So usually the first 3 or 4 lessons are devoted to how to fall correctly, properly, so you stay injury-free. And it's particularly important for a visually impaired athlete because they tend to be, when they're off the ground and being thrown, it can stiffen up, and those joints hit the mat, and if they're stiff, you get injury out of that. That's typically a shoulder injury, and in an arm, or in the upper body area. Those are the two that stand out most. You have other minor injuries like mat burns, and maybe some cuts on your hands by someone's nails that should have been cut a little shorter. But by and large, judo is a very safe sport. In fact, the American Council on Youth Sport recognizes that judo is the safest sports for children aged under 13. That's the perfect sport for a youngster to develop self-confidence and also develop some physical qualities.
Fantastic. We have a couple other questions in the queue. Nicole Kirk is very interested in the possibility of IPSA and the IPC reorganizing or going through the reclassification of athletes and splitting B1s and B2s and B3s. So that research came out from the IPC, and they provided IPSA 30,000 euros, I believe, to have this study conducted with a research organization out of the Netherlands. Can you elaborate on what you know of the possibility of reclassifying athletes and what that could potentially look like? I know the study or the implications yet have not been delivered, but what do you know on this study?
Okay, well, currently the study is elaborate. It took 3 years. It was done through the Free University in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. And the data from that study has been released. I think it's been out for almost a year now. The IPSA is forming a committee of coaches, educators, athletes, and other administrators to take a look at their proposed changes, which are dramatic. There's always been an assumption that that B1 athletes are not at a disadvantage when competing against B2 or B3 athletes, and that's why those 3 divisions competed against one another. And the data over the last 16 years suggests that that's not true, that in fact B1s are at some disadvantage depending on the severity of visual impairment, and that from a true medal count standpoint, B2s and B3s have won more medals. In order to make it a more equal playing field, and also a message to IPSA from the IPC saying that if you want to remain a Paralympic sport, you have to have, you have to research your classification system to make sure that it is in fact optimal and it provides an equal playing field, which the research shows that it has not. So the proposals that IPSA has is to develop two distinct divisions, one for the B1s to fight amongst themselves within their weight categories, and then a second division for B2s and B3s to fight amongst themselves within the various weight class categories. Now, the IPC's got a problem with the medals because judo right now has got 13 medals. That is 13 medals, 13 gold, and then 13 silver, and then 26 bronze. So there's a lot of medals in judo. If you divide those divisions in half, you would increase even more medals. So what they've done is they're going to look at the weight divisions. There are currently 7 weight divisions for men, and they will make those weight divisions most likely into 4 divisions. Those will be a light, middle, light, heavy, and heavyweight division. And then for women, they would do the same thing: light, middle, light, heavy, heavyweight division. So 4 weight divisions for each of those 2 larger groups of athletes that will no longer compete against each other. So that's current, and I believe that that's exactly what's going to happen to qualify athletes. The other big change that will happen is that there's some athletes that are on the cusp right now. A lot of those athletes are albino or have visual conditions which are exotic, and IPSA wants to develop or has a classification system which is a little bit more difficult to get through than the current one. They're changing their standards and making it a little bit more harder to qualify to be a Paralympic judo athlete, at least for the World Championships and Paralympic Games. Mind you, know that some countries, I think England is one of them, they also have a B4 category, and there's a B5 category, which athletes are allowed to compete in on the national level. But as soon as you get into the international arena, then you're looking at B1s, B2s, and B3s, and not B4s and B5s. And we have actually had athletes that have had good days and bad days. On a good day, they qualify because of environmental conditions, and on a particularly bad day, they would not qualify. So they still have some work to do to fine tune this. But I think personally, I think that it's the right way to go. There are people that disagree with me, but I think that the way we're headed in terms of the weight divisions and the classification system and separating B1s, I think is a good thing for the sport and will advance the growth of the sport.
And Mark, there are IPSA's having various public hearings via Skype on that. Is that correct? That anyone
There
can...
are, yes. We had the first meeting earlier this week, and there's a second meeting. I think there are 2 more meetings that are both in October. The next meeting is October the 9th, which is open, as you just indicated, to the public to hear and to provide feedback in terms of what's being suggested, so that everyone will have input into this.
Sharing that. A couple more questions, some really great questions coming in. So one participant is asking about sighted athletes competing and sparring, practicing and sparring and competing against blind and visually impaired athletes. Can you elaborate on
Sure.
the benefits of that and how that's worked out, and even U.S. judo competitions and how blind athletes successfully compete in those competitions?
So where to begin in this area here. I have my own athletes. I have people that I train that I'm with during the week, and I usually most of my athletes are B1s. For some reason, I work with a lot of B1 athletes, and the training is very, very important. My athletes usually train 3 times a week when they're not in the weight room, but those athletes are working to make an Olympic team or a world championship team. So they're serious about the sport. So they're working with B and other B1s, other B2s, other B3s, but they're also working with folks that are able-bodied, because an able-bodied judoka is essentially like a B3 athlete. Years ago, athletes used to train with blindfolds, and they thought that if we trained with a blindfold, it would give us simulate blindness and help us. But in fact, all the evidence shows that if you put a blindfold on an able-bodied athlete, it gives them no advantage or disadvantage at all. It's really not a very good way to train, but it is very good for a visually impaired athlete to train with an able-bodied athlete, because the able-bodied athlete is like a B3, which would be the hardest match that you could get in terms of visual impairment strength. So if you're a B1 athlete just working with other B1s, you're going to have a very limited reflection on what judo feels like. As soon as you're touch and go with an athlete that can see fairly well, it's a whole different feeling. And it's important that an athlete get to know what that feels like, and what that experience is like, so that they can deal with it when it happens, because it can be a shock. The judo is an amazing sport in that you can be thrown over and over and over again, knowing that someone's going to throw you with a particular throw, and they'll throw you anyway with it. And there's really nothing you can do to stop it. That's how good these athletes are. I mean, that is fantastic. But if you're a beginner, you're going to have to go through that initiation, and as you get, as you learn, then you get to appreciate, the skill that's involved with that. So again, I got off track a little bit. I hope I didn't get too far off track.
No, you're perfect. Awesome. One of the questions from DB Manny, he's asking about the gis, and you talked about how a totally blind athlete has a red ball and a deaf athlete has a symbol
Orange. Yeah.
on their gi. So can you talk about the gi, the costs, where you get them, and some of the strategies in competitions about how you want to have a tighter gi, but you can't have it too tight because then it's illegal. Can you talk about the gi and the cost and where you get them and the
Sure.
stitching, et cetera?
I mean, there's some funny stories associated with this. When I started in the 60s, the gi, most gis were single weave gis. So some of them, after a while, and having washed them in bleach, would tear. They were fairly inexpensive, about $35 for a single weave gi. You had to have a gi to work out in. A gi is formulated or structured very similar to what Japanese used to wear during the turn of the century. It's a jacket without buttons, no zippers. It just is an open jacket that you close, and you hold the jacket together with a belt that's tied in a square knot. And then you have a pair of pants that has drawstrings to it. So the gi itself has no metal in it. It has nothing that sharp in it. So it's a safe outfit to wear. What it does is it amplifies all the moves that you do through the material of the gi that's in contact with your skin. Without the gi, judo would be a very different sport. Having said that, though, I mean, if you come from a wrestling background, you don't have the sense of the gi. So that's a big difference. Nowadays, gis can be as expensive as $200-300, depending on the quality of the gi. The IJF, or the International Judo Federation, now has standards for gis. So when I was first starting, some guys wouldn't wash their gis because they smelled and it would bother the other competitor. Some guys would use Vaseline and put Vaseline on the back of the neck so that when you grabbed it, the gi would be slippery. Some guys would cut their gis to make their sleeves shorter, tighten the gis so that their sleeves would be tighter on the wrists. You can't do that anymore because it's all standardized. So in order to compete internationally, or even in the national championships, which we have once a year, you have to have a standard IJF gi, a standard International Judo Federation gi. Typically, our national team is given a gi like that every year to train in. The gis, by the way, come in two colors. They come in white and blue to distinguish the two fighters. So that makes it a little bit easier than it used to be. When I started, everybody wore a white gi, and the only distinguishing feature was a red sash around one of the gis and a white sash around the other. Now it's much easier, and I think some of that may have been done for the purposes of TV and an audience expectation, so they could follow a match a little bit closer. Did that answer the question on the gi?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. And I have one more personal question. I'm very curious and interested and intrigued about your new book, Teaching Fundamentals of Paralympic Judo. It took you 4 years to write this book. Can you give us an overview of that wonderful book that took you 4 years to write?
Well, what it comes down to is resources. I noticed that a lot of sports had coaches' manuals, and there was really no manual for Paralympic Judo. Paralympic athlete would go to an able-bodied book and try to learn from that. But there were subtleties. There are such subtleties with the visually impaired community that a lot of able-bodied athletes have no idea about. And so the book takes those subtleties and amplifies them and discusses them and provides a resource and an answer to these types of problems. What I did is in my travels around the world, I would meet athletes from other countries and interview them and have them show me their favorite techniques. Most of these athletes that I interviewed were Paralympic medal winners. They allowed me to photograph them, and I spoke to their coaches. So I took what I considered to be the most fundamental of all of the things that they were doing and create a book for a coach to use so that if an athlete comes into their club, they could just pull out this manual and say, my first lesson looks like this. This is how I'm going to conduct my first lesson. This is how an athlete should learn how to fall, the first throws that they should learn, the first holds that they should learn, and it follows an athlete for 6 months in terms of lesson plans. So it provides lesson plans with the basic throws that you'll need. These throws are classic, they'll last forever, as opposed to exotic stuff. This is very fundamental. But you can't really advance without these basic techniques and how to learn them step by step. If you're a blind person, how does a coach teach you a throw if you're totally visually impaired? And if you're in a class with 10 other athletes that are able-bodied, how do you do that without you being left out? So those are skills that were out there in other sports. So I also consolidated a lot of the best techniques in other sports. I found helpful hints in soccer, gymnastics, golf, all types of sports, and there are little details there that could apply to judo, and where they did, I introduced them into the book. So it's a beginner's book, and it's a beginner's book for coaches. I can tell you that any athlete that buys the book today, and it's a really fairly inexpensive book. I think for a softcover book, it's I think it's $12.95, and for a hardcover, it's $19.95. You buy that book today, all those proceeds will go to USABA, cash, directly. No middleman fee, no hanky panky. You buy the book for $12.95, and $12.95 goes right to USABA for the development of these types of programs.
Well, thank you for that generous offer and gift to the United States Association of Blind Athletes. And Coach Vink, your contribution to blind judo in local communities across the United States with USA Judo, with the United States Association of Blind Athletes, and internationally has been truly significant. I cannot imagine the number of blind and sighted judokas you've touched over your stellar career. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for the contribution on the book to USABA and the contribution to blind judo and sighted judo across the United States and in the world. So
My
thank
pleasure,
you for
Mark. My
the
pleasure.
presentation today.
Okay.
Hey, listeners, don't forget to join us this afternoon as we continue Blind Judo Day at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You're not want to miss fiery Paralympic athlete who's a dynamite athlete, Ben Goodrich, who competed in the last Paralympic Games, to continue our momentum into Blind Judo Day. And then later on this afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to switch gears and we're going to go into a winter sport. I'm very intrigued about blind hockey, one of the fastest growing team sports in the United States, trying to get on the Winter Paralympic Games. And then at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, you're going to have a bonus presentation from Kat Beaucamp, USABA staff member, on the significance of the United States Association of Blind Athletes in the United States. And you won't want to miss tomorrow's presentations and Fridays as we continue our seminars on National Blind Sports Week, and then concluding on Saturday with National Blind Sports Day, where countless communities across the United States and hundreds of blind and visually impaired children, youth, and adults and their families and friends will all go out and play on National Blind Sports Day. So don't forget to get your cameras out, your iPhones, and snap those pictures on Facebook and share them as we all contribute to the growth of blind sports in the United States. Thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this presentation. And Dr. Mark Vink, thank you for your contribution to blind judo across the United States and in the world.
Hope to see you on the mat, guys. Come join us. You'll love it.
I won't let you teach me the gentle way. Have a great day, everybody. Talk to you later.
Come on.